you'll never be as good as the play. That even when the language is at its most lyrical or most quotes beautiful, there's also a point being made.
When you first started acting, was Shakespeare something that you wanted to do?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's always there. It's not that it sits on the horizon, but it's always present, and I think you always test yourself against. Well, you test yourself against great writing, and you talking about Peter Brook reminds me. I worked with him once at Stratford, and in a way, working with someone like him on Shakespeare lets you off the hook a little bit, because, or takes some of the fear away, because I remember him coming to see a performance. It was Antony and Cleopatra with Glenda Jackson and Alan Howard, and he gathered the company together afterwards and said, "So, how's it been going?" And we said, "Oh, well, this scene this or that scene that, and we're not really getting to X in this part of the play or Y in that part of the play." And he said, "Yes," he said, I go back and see companies, and they tell me what the problems are, and he said, the thing is, you'll never be as good as the play." And so, I mean, that stays with me and is quite releasing, because you're aware of the size of, not the problem, but the greatness of the writing. And I suppose what that's done over time has developed into a belief that what one's aiming at is suitably impossible, always with great writing, which is to be absolutely disciplined and absolutely free at the same time, and that the two things have to work together. I always think it's a bit like the last image of The Tempest, when Caliban is held tight at the same moment as Ariel's let go, and it seems to me that in a way maybe that's Shakespeare writing about being a creative person. You have this impossible aim, and whatever your horizon is, you keep moving towards it, but it relentlessly moves away from you. So in a more relaxed way, I think, and as one gets older, I suppose you read Shakespeare in a different way, and it opens itself up to you more, because you've got a few more life experiences to bring to whenever you open the book and read it. Doesn't get easier, but it gets a little more available, maybe, or you understand what's weaving in and out of those lines a bit more. And it's a very clear, passionate, open, beautiful, thoughtful, profound, skittish, comedic, tragic, amazing language, and you have to pit yourself against it as a person. That's the other thing, it's you as a person, it's not you as an actor alone. You've got to measure up to it as a person, and so it's what your life choices are as well as what your technique is or your imagination is. But somehow or other, when it's affected me most is when you're aware of all those forces combining into something which ultimately is just telling a story, and seems to be quite a simple exercise.
Have you found it the greatest challenge for you as an actor?
No, not always. Other things, working on some crappy piece of material that you have to scrape off the page can be a huge challenge in a different way. No, I've had some very, very happy, free, celebratory times with Shakespeare, and I've had the opposite as well.
Did you study to RADA? And was that helpful? Did you enter the profession having sort of feeling, okay, I know what I want to try and do with this, or did you feel a quick?
Well, I was quite late. I mean, I didn't go to RADA till I was 25, so you know, I knew why I was there. I think it's different, not necessarily better or worse, to go, excuse me, when you're 18. I mean, not for obvious reasons. And I think drama school it's many things and can be many things, and a lot of it's just to do with circumstance. It depends who your fellow students are in your year. It depends which teachers are there at that period of time. It depends how open you are. It depends, you know, you're learning about how your body is connected to your head and what that relationship is. And there's a lot of breaking down that goes on at drama school in order to rebuild. And that affects different people in different ways. And some people have a miserable time at drama school and then put it together later on. And I still, to this day, I think, oh, that's what she or he was talking about. I understand it now. You know, it's a complex piece of machinery. It's, as I say, it's partly a piece of disciplined machinery, and it's partly one that's to do with your imagination, and it's figuring out how you put those two things together. So drama school was incredibly important to me. I happened to be part of a group of actors in my year who worked very well together as a team. That certainly wasn't true of other groups who were there at the same time as me, much more lethal with each other. We got on really well. And I had some great teachers, not least the principal, 𝘼𝙡𝙖𝙣, who was a kind of genius at operating a sort of umbrella that encompassed and protected and challenged everybody.
Do you remember when you went to the RSC first, was there a way of approaching the text, say, and the language? Was there a way of sort of doing it? Can you remember? Or
well, John Barton was there very much in evidence, and so yeah, we had sonnet classes, and it was very much about iambic pentameters and punctuation and, you know, technical things about how to speak the verse.
And did those things help you? Were they useful?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, there's certain things about half lines and certain things about if there's no punctuation, then that means there's no breath. Then again, this balancing act of your instrument and your imagination, and how those two have got to have a conversation with each other for a performance to come out of it. And they're very helpful, people like 𝘼𝙭, you know, walking geniuses at encouraging you, as in fill with courage. At the same time, you know, I ran from Stratford the first time because I thought I was just, that whole thing about shouting in the dark. This is what I thought I was learning to do as well. There was huge pressure to perform loudly.
And that wasn't something that you felt comfortable with?
No, I found it incredibly destructive to be part of.
So were you there at that transition in kind of...
It was well, I was there 2 times, and they were both extraordinary. One was when Peter Brook did his first piece of work in England for 13 years, so that was huge. And that company was the first time, I think, there were people who had come from the fringe and from political theatre, and so it wasn't like being trained up through the ranks necessarily. And I remember it being very hard for Peter to get a corporate energy in the room, because there was a lot of kind of suspicion of guru figures from people who'd come from the bush and the gate and 784 or whatever. So it was a very interesting time to be there, and things like Juliet Stevenson was playing Charmian or Iris, you know, almost no lines, and she only got the job because another actress had stepped off a pavement and injured her ankle, so they were ringing RADA and saying, "Have you got somebody who's just graduated?" Oh, it was this girl Juliet Stevenson. The second time I was there, Juliet was there again, and it was with Fiona Shaw. That was a hugely important time because it was 1985 and a very feminist reading of As You Like It, and we also did Les Liaisons Dangereuses in the season, which was kind of okay, we were all in posh costumes, but it was really a play about the 80s and a particular mindset. So yeah, they were both important times, socially as well as everything else.
And how did you go about playing 𝘍𝙗𝙖? Because that's what you played in As You Like It, right? Can you remember how you...
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'd played it once before, and so it was an ongoing conversation in my head, and Adrian Noble was very open to, you know, what actors' governing ideas of what they were doing, where it was leading. I just always thought that this was somebody in search of conversation, hungry for discourse and chat and talking about stuff, and it was a very agile and modern production. So it was, you know, there was the raw material for that was in the production, and that I didn't think it was this kind of dreary old cynic. I thought it was somebody who was actually rather plugged in to the world.
And you get that from the text, or how do you come by your ideas about a character?
Yeah, you can't impose. I think that's the thing with Shakespeare and any good piece of writing. It tells you what to do if you listen hard enough, and there's fantastic energy in 𝘍𝙗𝙖's verse, and anger, and pain on behalf of the world. The cynicism, the quotes cynicism is just a protective layer of something very, very vulnerable.
Do you, just how do you deal with the fact that these parts are so famous and they've been played many, many times before by famous actors? Is that something you have to consider, or do you just get on with it, or do you...
Well, you know that objectively, but of course, ultimately, you're going to be in a situation with other actors saying stuff. And they've got to believe you, and you've got to believe the situation that the stuff you say is coming out of. So that's a lot down to the director's view of the world that you're creating together. I think with a speech like that, you're never unaware that it's a famous speech, because try as you might, as soon as you start, a very weird hush happens in the house. You know, it was the same when I played Hamlet, and I'm sure every Hamlet will say, as soon as you start to be or not to be, everybody goes a bit stiller. So it's certainly true with All the World's a Stage. But you know, there's a little rule. I think I'm right in saying it starts on a half line, so it comes in immediately. It's not careful thought. However, it's a very carefully structured speech, so it's not like it's just improvised. It's something that I think I wrote somewhere that it's an aria, and it feels a bit like that in a very musical play. He's got an aria, and he kind of doesn't pause until he's sung it out of him. And that's a dangerous word, sing, but because that certainly shouldn't you what you want to do. I think even when the sonnets tell you that even when the language is at its most lyrical or most quotes beautiful, there's also a point being made, you know, that you take a breath at the beginning of the sonnet and pretty much without exception, it's an argument, and it starts in the first line and it finishes 14 lines later. And you basically have to drive your voice and breath towards that last couplet. And All the World's a Stage is, well, it's a desperate view of humanity, first of all, you know. And I think often the danger is that it becomes lyrical, but every single image in it is hideous. It's not pretty. There's not a piece of romance in it. Even love is kind of treated with a black pen. So that's the what of it, and then the how of it is to do with rehearsal and talking about it and your own passions and what you think is happening in the whole scene at that time. What does the speech come out of?
I was watching, I remember watching the Romeo and Juliet that you did on television.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to what you were talking about, shouting in the dark, how language, I mean, when I see you perform on television or on screen, on film, it's a sort of, because it's a direct delivery in terms of the language is also very clear. I mean, we always think that, you know, there's those things that you've got the sort of greatest, the speaking voice of, what was that thing? The ideal speaking voice. We know we can. I read that somewhere. But language for you is obviously a very important thing, and clarity and diction and the use of language. And in that Romeo and Juliet, I remember everyone else, was it early 80s, I think, maybe? Is it early 80s or mid 80s?
Might have been earlier than that. I think it might have been the 70s.
Right.
But anyway.
And there's a sort of lot of, you know, Shakespeare acting going on, and then you just simply walk in and talk, and somehow I listen more, I hear more of what you're saying, because there isn't all this other stuff going on. And I wondered where that came from with you. You just mentioned about not being completely comfortable at the RSC with, you know, this big delivery. So that was obviously something that you thought about right from the start of your career.
Well, I think it's a bit to do with, I mean, I directed a play of Strindberg's at the end of last year, and only 3 actors, and at certain points in your life, you know, you've got to kind of stand up and be counted. And so as a director, working with 3 actors all of whom I admire very much, I thought, well, you know, the cards are on the table here, because this is a really nakedly emotional piece of work by Strindberg. And so I said, well, this is going to be about not just about you as actors or you as characters, but this is going to be about you as people. And what the hell are you doing getting up on a stage anyway? What's the point of it? And storytelling is a human need. We all need to be, not just once upon a time as kids. It's a 1,000-year-old tradition in Tunisian marketplaces, and people gather to hear the same story told over and over again in different ways. It's an actual human need. It's how we learn about who we are. So it's slightly outside yourself as well as being, so there's another balancing act of it being very personal and very shared. And somehow or other, ego is incredibly important to feed into the whole machinery, you know, it's what gets you up there. God-given talent is also part of it. Then there's what you do with that talent by training it. And, you know, just to go back to the voice thing, you know, I had on record people at RADA say, first of all, I had appalling diction at RADA, and secondly, voice teachers saying you sound as if your voice is coming out of the back end of a drain pipe. So there was a lot of work, and remains so, you know.
You still do?
Well, it's yeah, because if you have a deep voice, certain auditoriums are just death. And people say, well, I can't hear a word he's saying. So all of that, but I just more and more think that when you walk onto a stage, it's a political act. Even if you're saying anyone for tennis, you've got a captive audience. So what are you saying to them? Because there are actually people out there, some of whom are just there to talk about having been there at their next dinner party. Some of them are there because their wife or husband has a subscription, they've got to go, and they've got the briefcase between their knees and they can't wait to get a drink. Some of them are there and a key is going to be turned in their brain, heart, consciousness, and their lives are going to be affected in the same way that honest storytelling always will. We all remember stories where you lose yourself inside them and you find out something about yourself as well. You feel yourself growing up as a child when you work something out about life and who you are and your place in the scheme of things. So it's a very big battle, theatre. And you always know when you're, and in an age of iPods and computers and video games and all the rest of it, and movies, it's still possible for a piece of theatre to come along, and as you're watching it, you know that you couldn't possibly be experiencing what you're experiencing anywhere else but in a theatre.
So what were your first experiences of coming across Shakespeare? Was it at school?
Mm-hmm.
And were you taught in such a way that you understood it at that age, or did that become clearer when you got to the
It was a very practical thing. We had a lot of, there was a very strong drama tradition at the school I was at from 11 to 18, and very big after-school drama societies, and we would do fully staged, fully costumed productions of, I remember doing Coriolanus and Measure for Measure on a Friday afternoon in 2 installments, and we would all be in full costumes but holding the books. Directed, rehearsed, costumed, the whole thing, but you didn't learn the lines. So that became a very practical and un-Ponzi way of doing it. You know, you just had to get up there and get on with it.
Yeah. So that's one of the things we've been talking about quite a lot, is that it seems nowadays at school, and this, depending on where you go, you can be in a position where you're given a book to look at. Everyone sits down and people just, read it. There's no kind of reading out or up and with the text. And one of the things that we're trying to kind of look at here as well is how younger audiences are becoming disenfranchised from the language of Shakespeare as well. So obviously you had a great opportunity at that age, education-wise, which I guess gave you that.
I think different things go on in schools now, probably. And I did go and see an amazing shortened production of Hamlet at a kids' school recently, where you thought, whoa, things have moved on. This is like Oh Lucky Man on stage.
Yeah.
But done, it was Hamlet, and things like BT Connections that the National runs with new writing. I think you've got to take on board that that's got to be part of their currency too, in a way that it wasn't for us.
Yeah.
My film society at school was showing Will Hay films. You're too young to even know what that is, but it's just like, Ealing comedies. It was as far as it went. And so when I went to art school, suddenly I was discovering this weird world of Fellini and Antonioni and people. And I think it's a different breed of child out there now, I went to see Romeo and Juliet at the Globe a couple of weeks ago as part of their education project, and That was like being in a football stadium, and talk about shouting in the dark. They had no option. You know, this was the shouted version of Romeo and Juliet because nothing else was going to get across the crowd. But it was rather wonderful. I mean, I know the Globe encourages that sort of thing, just the space, but...
So do you think it's a bad thing or a good thing, or maybe neither, that it's not quite being pushed in the same way that it was at school?
Well, I think it's... the kids need to be exposed to classic texts as well as 𝘍𝙬𝙖𝙣 or whoever. But the world changes, and you've got to... And they're much more confident children now. They're, whatever that word means, but they're much more grown up earlier. They know more. You know, I don't think there's such things as short trousers anymore.
No. I'm always amazed actually because my family live in Cambridge, and when you go back to Cambridge and you see the kids in Cambridge or the kids in rural Cambridgeshire, and then you sort of walk around London, you see the kids at the same age. It's just it's incredible. I guess it's always been a bit like that, but it seems to be much more extreme now.
Yeah, you just got to have your finger up to the wind, I think, and hope that whatever education system we have is training enough teachers, and that there are enough people who want to teach it in a creative way, or can make a classic text live and not feel alien.
Which actors or directors influenced you when you were...
Well, all of them. You know, it's hard to pick out names, but I mean, I've been very lucky. I've worked with some of the great directors, and like all actors, worked with some not so great, where you maybe grow bigger muscles. So they're all incredibly influential, because you have to figure out how do you function in this atmosphere that's being created, and how can you be more yielding to somebody with strong ideas, or how can you be, I don't know, I fail at all of this stuff. Be more yielding, or be less temperamental with people who aren't so helpful. Yeah. X.
Do you see? Have you seen many of the films, Shakespeare films? Do you think they work on screen, and also having filmed some? Are there things that you get from filming it that you don't get on stage?
I always think that, say with something like Troilus and Cressida, that's Shakespeare wishing somebody would invent the movies, because how else do you get two opposing armies? And you know, it's like he's in his head somehow cutting from army to army, and in the theatre, of course, it's like two rounders teams or something. Some poor actors are having to be in both sides, and they've got a different hat to pull on. And also, particularly with something like Troilus and Cressida, you sort of want to feel that battlefield. And when I read that play now, I immediately think of you know, recent terrible war environments, and you think that play will just sit straight inside Gaza or Sarajevo. Or so he wrote film scripts as well. They remain relevant. You just have to really listen to them and let them tell you what to do. Just the fact that I read Troilus and Cressida and immediately see a contemporary war with idiots on both sides, and vanity on both sides, and people caught in the middle. Or Romeo and Juliet, you know, two cultures. It's not a great stretch to suddenly make a movie or a sort of West Side Story situation out of it.
And what about if you have a long run in something in Shakespeare play? how do you maintain that sense of character and performance that you sort of hopefully have found at the beginning?
Well, I think that it goes back to what I was saying about who are you as a person, what do you want to do on the stage? Do you want to be truthful or do you want to show off? So you can make that choice, and aiming to be truthful is going to be a nightly shift of the horizon. You know, your center is in a different place every day. You've got to relocate it when you walk on stage in order to have any measure of truthfulness to what you're doing. And also you've got fellow actors who are all in a different place. So there's all that renegotiation nightly happening. And, you know, that phrase, being in the moment. But of course you also have responsibilities to a text, which is demanding in itself. It's not naturalism. So, you know, you've got to get your equipment into a place which hasn't just wandered off the tube. Yeah. It's somewhere else. Yeah. So you've got all those responsibilities, and you're always a slightly different person every day. You can't just repeat what you did last night. Yeah. Won't happen.
How was performing in Stratford? Did you like Stratford? Was it a good environment to work in?
Well, I look forward to what they're doing with it now, and when it reopens next year, I think, you know, it looks exciting as a space. I certainly had happy times in the other place, which then was just a shed and a found theatre. It never was built as a theatre, it was a tin shed, and like a lot of found theatres, it had a certain magic to it. The old Memorial Theatre I didn't particularly enjoy working in, but having said that, of course, as a schoolboy and a student, I remember having some amazing evenings in the audience.
But as a performer, it wasn't particularly helpful, because a few people sort of say that the size of it or the...
Well, it's because, you know, it was built for a certain kind of work, largely, and those things change, and so now it's going to be much more audience on three sides rather than up and atom. Up and shouting at them.
Yeah.
Have you found audiences have changed much over your career? I mean, for example, last night I went to see Dimitos and 6 mobile phones went off, and even though they'd announced
it. Oh, really?
Yeah, it's obviously it's abhorrent, but I just wondered, like, obviously that's one side of things, but the receptiveness of audience, does that change, or is that still the same?
I don't know, because, you know, you look at it from a different standpoint. You know, at one point at the beginning of your career, you're a lot younger and a lot poorer, I suppose. And you know, you're going on stage with a hungrier energy. Maybe I don't know. I'm just a different. I'm a different set of responses now, and plus I direct a bit as well as act. So maybe I watch it all through different eyes.
Of course, yeah.
I just get depressed by it not being made easier for young people to come to the theatre. You know, it seems still to be largely the preserve of the middle-aged white middle classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it exercises me very much if I feel a kind of Daily Mailness coming off.
Yeah. Do you think that'll change? Like, what do we do about it?
We're going to make it cheaper. It's got to be more of a priority. You know, things like Travel Exit, the National, is all very good, and then it's got to be made easier for teachers to not feel they're sacrificing their private lives to take groups of kids to the theatre.
You hadn't actually considered that, so that's a really good point. Yeah, it's a whole night out, evening, day trip.
Well, and the ones that work on drama, you know, they're giving up their evenings to rehearse something.
Yeah.
A lot of unpaid work going on there. And it's got to remain a relevant force. And it changes a lot, you know. You know, shows go on in the West End with television names in them. So the notion of a developing theatre career for actors is much harder to maintain, because young actors now don't have a strong union and don't have a repertory system to be bad in, to learn in, to grow muscles in. You know, there's instant judgment made on 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds who also, I'm not saying all, but the world that they walk out, if they go to drama school, the world they walk out into is one which says, yes, you too can be a movie star tomorrow. And they can, but they can also be dumped 3 years later.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, neither a union nor a rep system to support you or give you something that you feel, right, I rest on that, or you know, it's like handlebars or something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great shame.
But the world changes, you know, you can't kind of yank it back to what you want it to be, and then every so often, as I was saying before, you go to a piece of theatre and you think, totally current, totally passionate, absolutely disciplined. It sounds like that's what you're doing at the moment at the National. And, you know, Rufus Norris trained as an actor.
Yeah.
So he comes at it from a much more, I'm not saying everybody has to train as an actor, but it helps maybe at certain times.
You directed in America?
Well, I did a production of My Name is 𝘼𝙧𝙖, which was at the Royal Court, and then went to America. And credit is he's going to America, so.
Because one question we're asking is whether whether you think the Americans are right to feel that they can't do Shakespeare. There's always this thing.
No, it's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. I saw a great As You Like It years ago in Long Beach, California, with American accents. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that if we had a time machine, the accent of the actors would be much closer to an American accent than anything that's coming out of my mouth now, because it would have been Warwickshire. And it would have been full of rolled R's, and, you know, that's why you suddenly hear a kind of certain freeing when you go to see any of Barry Rutter's. You should talk to him, of course, about Northern Broadsides. And you think, wow, that sits somewhere very grounded when somebody says, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. And
She even said that, didn't
Yeah.
She even said that.
Producers and things.
No, I just think what they don't have is they don't have any government subsidy for theatre. So things like Shakespeare are very difficult to justify unless it comes out of the public theatre in New York and it's Shakespeare in the Park, but then it's only once a year, and then it has to be movie stars. You know, they don't have a national theatre.
I was wondering why that
Yeah,
is.
that is strange, isn't it, actually?
Never seems to
Because
be.
they don't believe in public subsidy of the or government subsidy of the arts. Maybe with Obama things will change, but up until now, it's you know, if you don't think it's important to have a healthcare system, then you're certainly not going to be giving money to theatres.
True. That's so true. Yeah. Yeah. Who else should we speak to? I mean, are there people that you think are particularly?
Well, I think, you know, people like Catherine Hunter and because of where she's come from, and she's directed and obviously acted, and she's about to take all of that back to Stratford. She's going to do Cleopatra and the Fool in Lear, and she's played Lear and played Richard III and directed Othello. So she's also, she's a great person, as well as a phenomenal physical and imaginative force.
Yeah, we were speaking to Sarah Kestelman the other day.
Yeah. So
She said the same thing.
Well, she was sitting behind me the other night watching Catherine doing Kafka's.
that's what she, that's
She
right.
said
That's what
she's
she was
seen
talking about.
Yeah, Catherine and Simon McBurney and some foreign people. If they speak English or you have subtitles.
Yeah.
Talk to 𝙍𝙖𝙣 or.
Oh, God, yeah.
Certainly, whenever you go abroad and see Shakespeare being done by the Russians or the Japanese or the Germans, then you go, whoa.
Actually, Japan was somewhere we did want to sort of perhaps go if we can kind of raise the funds, because I've no idea what it would be like in Japan. Have you seen Japanese Shakespeare?
Yeah, I was watching the Kabuki 12th Night 2 weeks ago at the Barbican.
Right.
Not to make you feel
Yeah, I know.
guilty and stupid or
I
anything,
know,
you
it's all
didn't
right,
go,
I feel guilty and stupid now.
there it was. And Titus was at Stratford, Nina Gow's production 3-4 years ago. And his Tempest was at the Barbican a while ago. It's fascinating to, and his Midsummer Night's Dream came over here, and his Hamlet, and his King Lear.
I'll do a bit more research.
And when I did Hamlet, I worked with Robert. The director was Robert Sterua from the Ristavelli Company in Georgia, and so we were working through an interpreter. Mm-hmm. And that was an extraordinary mixture of cultures. And still lives inside one's head, because we were rehearsing the play up one end of the rehearsal room, and down the other end he and his designer Georgi were on a little radio listening to civil war going on in the streets of Tbilisi.
Wow, how was that? Were you the only English person in it?
No, he came over and directed it. We did it at Riverside and then toured it. So it was an English production, but through an interpreter with a great Russian director. Yeah, that was quite an experience.
Hamlet. A lot of people's perspective have sort of played Hamlet. It is the one, isn't it? And there's that thing that people say you never get all of it, or you never, you could happily go back to it again.
Would be a bit tragic. But
in terms of what you got out of it, performing it.
Well, total panic and horror, really, because we did it in 5 weeks, which was nuts. With hindsight, we were just about beginning to find out what the hell we were doing by the time we ended the run of it. But yeah, I guess every production will take its heart and mind from the person playing that part. And the first time you put it all together, I just remember thinking, you bastard Shakespeare. It's all real reading it. But then when you've just finished that soliloquy, you've had like what feels like 3 seconds, and now there's that one, and now here comes that one. But it's a thrill too, to just pitch yourself up against this rock face.
Yeah. And how do you go about doing that? I don't know if you can answer that question, but one of the things I always think is it is all well and good reading things, but then getting it up on its feet onto the rehearsal room floor, onto the stage that's a difficult thing to do, isn't it? You have this.
But difficult's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly is, but you have to find a way through of managing that, don't you? Especially with Shakespeare, you have this text which you have to adhere to.
The thing is, say it like you mean it is a good starting point, and I think anything that's a simple question, really ask the question. People forget, you've got this little line that's got a question mark on the end of it, and it just sort of comes out. But if there's a physical need to know the answer, then some of the big speeches become less of a problem because they're part of an alive body that's actually looking at another person and really wanting to know the answer to a question. So then you set up a kind of emotional landscape, and intellectual, to wander around in, but it's got real questions and real people and real need in it. And when you get an answer, it takes you somewhere else. And then I think these big speeches become less of a mountain. And with Hamlet, there's such a need. When the production we did, anyway, all the soliloquies were absolutely not interior. They were absolutely about engaging with the audience, because it seemed to me that he has two groups of friends, actors and audience, and the soliloquies were all very alive in that production, working things out. So to be or not to be was very much, listen, I just had this thought, now let me run this by you. Oh fuck, that didn't really work out, did it? Because if you go that, then you get, okay, let's start again. And other than that, the only people he's not suspicious of are the actors. That seems to me to be conscious by Shakespeare. Somebody who's slightly removed from reality and talks to actors and an audience.
Yeah.
Good luck playing it.
Well, when we were at Mount, we had the third year thing where you do a mock audition, and we went in and I did that. I did To Be or Not to Be, and the guy said, "Oh, well, for a start, you should have picked something a bit more appropriate. You're never gonna play Hamlet, are you? You should have done something a bit more."
Who was this Pratt?
I don't know who he was. I think I
I
came
do,
across
but
him
I
later.
can't possibly say his
Do you
name.
remember who it was? I can't remember what the
Yeah.
guy's name was, but and it was only after I left that I thought,
This is what I mean about, you go to drama school and you come across some idiots. What right has he got to say you'll never play it? And anyway, what's that got to do with anything?
yeah.
But that's the muscles that you were talking about as well. It's kind of that little bit of going, well, actually,
Yeah.
even though it's wrong to say it, you have to get something positive from
I
it.
suppose.
Yeah, you do. You can't.
Strong enough muscle to hit him.
Well, I was
Pacifist.
I was stunned. You know how you are, because you're that nervous anyway, going into... Anyway. But anyway, no. Anyway, good.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay,
I'll let you go.
thank you, and you.